I didn't think it would come to this. Honestly, if you told me a year ago I'd be on the dark web, hunting for someone to ruin my ex-wife's life, I'd have laughed in your face. But here I am. I'm not proud of it. I'm not saying I'm the hero of this story. I'm just saying, sometimes life pushes you, and you push back. So here's what happened. My wife, ex-wife now, was everything to me. We were married for 6 years, and like any marriage, it had its ups and downs. But I loved her. I thought she loved me too. I really believed that. And for a while it was good. We had a decent life, nothing extravagant, but we were comfortable. A nice house in the suburbs, a couple of cats, plans for kids. You know, the American dream shit. Until I found out about him. At first I didn't suspect anything. She worked late a lot. Big projects at her job, lots of overtime. I'm not an insecure guy. I didn't question it. We had trust. Or at least I thought we did. Then one night I woke up around 2 a.m. and she wasn't in bed. That was weird. I got up to check on her, thinking maybe she was in the bathroom or something. But no, she was downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table, whispering on the phone. The moment I stepped in, she jumped. She didn't see me right away. I could hear her whispering, "No, no, I told you, he doesn't know. We're fine. We'll be fine." My stomach sank. She was so deep into whatever conversation she was having that she didn't even notice I was standing in the doorway. When she finally saw me, her face went pale. I remember it so clearly. She fumbled with her phone and stammered some excuse about a work call, but I knew better. I didn't say anything right then. I just went back upstairs, laid in bed, and stared at the ceiling, feeling like the floor had just dropped out from under me. Over the next few weeks, I started piecing it together. The late nights, the sudden interest in her appearance, the way she started locking her phone like I was some kind of stranger. I started following her, checking her phone when she wasn't around. I saw the messages, the pictures, some dude named Kevin, a co-worker. They had been seeing each other for months. I wanted to throw up. The betrayal was one thing, but what she did next, that's what broke me. I confronted her, and she didn't even try to deny it. She just looked at me, calm as could be, and said, "Yeah, so what? I'm not happy anymore." Just like that. No apology, no remorse. And when I told her I wanted a divorce, she didn't even flinch. She just packed her stuff and left. But here's where it gets bad. Real bad. A few weeks later, I found out she was pregnant. She claimed it was mine, but I knew better. I knew damn well it was Kevin's. Still, she tried to pin it on me, saying she'd make sure the kid was mine in court, that she'd ruin me financially if I didn't cooperate. I was furious. This wasn't just some affair. This was her trying to destroy my life, leaving me stuck paying for a kid that wasn't even mine. I didn't know what to do. I felt helpless. I talked to a lawyer, but he said without proof, it'd be hard to fight her. I needed something more, something concrete. And that's when I did something I never thought I'd do. I went to the dark web. I'd heard stories, about the things you can find there. Hackers, hitmen, illegal shit. I wasn't looking for a hitman, at least not at first. I just wanted dirt on her, something that would blow up her perfect little life with Kevin. I wanted her to suffer. I wanted her to know what it felt like to lose everything. It took me a while to figure out how to even get onto the dark web, but once I did, I started searching. I posted on a few forums asking for a hacker. Eventually, I got a message from a guy named Razor. No profile picture, no real info about him, just a simple message. "I can help you. $5,000 up front, $10K when it's done." It felt shady as hell, but I was desperate. I agreed. I sent him the details, my ex's name, her work info, her phone number, everything. He said he'd get back to me in a week. That week was the longest of my life. I kept second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd made a mistake. But when I thought about her smug face, when I remembered the way she looked at me, like I was nothing, I knew I had to go through with it. A week later, I got an email from Razor. There was an attachment. I opened it and my heart stopped. It wasn't just dirt on her. It was everything. He'd hacked into her phone, her work email, her personal computer. He had photos, videos, messages, not just with Kevin, but with other guys. Dozens of guys. She'd been cheating on me for years. There were videos of her doing things that made my stomach churn. But that wasn't the worst part. There was a video of her and Kevin. They were in a hotel room, talking, laughing. Then the camera panned over to a small table in the corner. There was a man tied up, blindfolded, gagged. At first I thought maybe they were into some kinky shit, but then I noticed something. The guy was crying, his chest was heaving, his body trembling, and my ex, she was smiling. "Should we start?" Kevin asked. She nodded, her smile widening, and then they started. They started cutting him, slowly, methodically, like they were savoring every second. His muffled screams were the most horrifying sound I've ever heard in my life. I watched, frozen, as they carved into him, as they did things to him, things I can't even describe, things that made me want to gouge my eyes out. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This wasn't just infidelity. This was something else, something evil, pure evil. I shut my laptop, my hands shaking. I didn't know what to do. I felt sick, like my whole world had been turned upside down. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. I sat there for hours, just staring at the wall, trying to process it all. What the hell was I supposed to do? Go to the police? Show them the video? But then they'd know I'd hired a hacker. And what if they didn't believe me? What if they thought I was involved somehow? I was trapped. I was stuck in this nightmare with no way out. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face, his bloodied body, my ex's smile. And I knew I had to do something. But I had no idea how deep this would go. I didn't think I'd ever feel more trapped than I did that night. After watching that video, I wasn't sure what to do. My brain was fried. The woman I'd loved for 6 years had turned out to be a complete stranger, a monster. But it wasn't just her. It was Kevin too. They weren't just cheating. They were killing people, torturing them, for fun. I couldn't get the image of that man, tied up, sobbing, begging for his life, out of my head. The way they sliced into him, the way they enjoyed it. I'll never forget that. And the worst part, the way my ex smiled. She wasn't doing it because she had to. She was doing it because she wanted to. I couldn't keep that to myself. I couldn't sit on this information, even if it put me in danger. I mean, what if there were more victims? What if they were doing this to people right now? But I didn't know who to turn to. I couldn't just walk into a police station with dark web files and say, "Hey, I hired a hacker, now arrest these 2 psychopaths." They'd arrest me for even being on the dark web in the first place. I kept telling myself I needed to act fast, but days went by, and I did nothing. It was like I was paralyzed with fear. I'd sit in front of my computer, staring at the video files, trying to figure out what to do next, but my brain wouldn't cooperate. My hands would start shaking, my vision would blur, and all I could hear was that man's screams echoing in my head. And then, something happened that pushed me over the edge. One morning, about a week after I got the files, I woke up to find a letter slipped under my front door. No stamp, no address, nothing. Just my name, written in that neat cursive handwriting I knew all too well. I tore it open, and my heart sank as I read the words. "We know what you did. Stay out of it, or you're next." No signature, but I knew exactly who it was from. My ex and Kevin knew I was onto them. They had to. Maybe they caught wind of Razor snooping around their data. Maybe they had some hacker of their own. I had no idea how deep their connections went, but they knew, and that scared the shit out of me. My first instinct was to get the hell out of town. Pack a bag, leave, and never look back. But that wouldn't solve anything. They'd find me eventually. They had the resources, the connections, and besides, I couldn't just walk away. There were people involved. Innocent people. I couldn't live with myself if I ran and they kept on doing whatever twisted shit they were doing. I knew I had to confront them. It was the only way. But how? I couldn't go alone. There was no telling what they'd do to me, but I couldn't involve anyone else either. I thought about contacting Razor, asking for more help, but I didn't even know how to reach him anymore. He'd gone silent after sending me the files, like a ghost. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started following my ex. It wasn't hard. She didn't know I was tailing her. She thought the letter had scared me off. That gave me an advantage. I needed to find something, anything, that would give me leverage, something I could use against them without risking my life. For days, I watched her. She didn't seem suspicious of anything. She went to work, met up with Kevin, carried on like everything was normal. But I knew better. I could see the cracks. There were moments when she'd glance over her shoulder or check her phone obsessively, like she was waiting for something, waiting for me to slip up, maybe. Then, one night, I followed her to a place I hadn't seen her go before. It wasn't a hotel or a restaurant. It was a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions if they hear screams. She was alone, and the way she walked inside, like she'd been there 100 times before, sent chills down my spine. I parked a few blocks away and waited. Hours passed, and she didn't come out. I was just about to give up when I saw headlights approaching. A black van pulled up to the warehouse. 2 men got out, one of them holding a large duffel bag. They didn't look like the kind of guys who were there for business meetings. These were hired muscle, no doubt about it. My heart was pounding in my chest. I had to know what was happening inside, but there was no way I could just waltz in there. Then I noticed a side window, slightly cracked open, just enough to hear what was going on. I snuck around, careful not to be seen, and pressed myself against the wall below the window. What I heard made my blood run cold. "We've got another one," a voice said, Kevin's voice. "Good," my ex replied, her tone calm, like she was talking about picking up groceries. "Make sure he knows what's coming. I want this one to last." Last? What the fuck did that mean? My mind was racing. Were they planning another murder? Another torture session like the one I saw on the video? The thought made me sick, but I couldn't stop listening. "I'll get the tools," Kevin said. I heard footsteps moving away, but my ex stayed behind, and for a moment, it was dead silent. Then I heard her whisper, so quiet I almost didn't catch it. "You should have stayed out of this. Now look where it got you." It took me a second to realize she wasn't talking to Kevin. She was talking to me. My blood turned to ice. She knew I was there. She'd known the whole time. The warehouse, the men, the van. It was all a setup. A fucking trap. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I bolted. Ran like my life depended on it, because it did. I could hear them coming after me, the crunch of boots on gravel, shouting, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I made it to my car and floored it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. That night I didn't go home. I drove to a cheap motel on the other side of town and holed up there, trying to figure out my next move. My mind was racing, but one thing was clear. They weren't just toying with me anymore. They were coming for me, and it was only a matter of time before they caught up. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cheap floral wallpaper, my stomach churning with dread. I had no idea what I was going to do next. I couldn't run forever, and I sure as hell couldn't hide. I had one option left, go on the offensive. But that meant crossing a line I wasn't sure I could come back from. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and searched for the one person I hoped could help me finish this once and for all. It was time to contact Razor again. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every creak of the motel floor, every shuffle of feet outside my door, it felt like they were already here, ready to drag me into some dark basement where no one would hear my screams. My head was spinning, running over every possible outcome, but they all ended the same way. Me, dead, probably in some gruesome, unimaginable way. But I wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, after what felt like years of sitting in that shitty motel room, I knew I had to do something. Razor, he was my only option. The guy was ruthless. He had to be, to dig up the kind of dirt he found on my ex.
If anyone could help me take them down, it was him. The problem was, I had no way of contacting him. The first time I found him, it was through some random dark web forum, and after I'd paid him, he'd gone silent. I wasn't even sure if Razor was his real handle. For all I knew, he could have changed it 100 times since we last talked. But I had to try. I logged back onto the dark web. My hands were trembling, sweat dripping from my palms as I navigated through the murky depths of the internet, hoping to find the forum where we'd first made contact. My head pounded with each click, each scroll, like the walls were closing in around me. I didn't have time. I knew they were out there, hunting me, but I forced myself to focus. After what felt like hours, I finally found something. A single post buried deep in a dark web message board that I hadn't seen before. It was vague, but the username was familiar. Razor. My heart raced as I clicked on it. The message was simple. For those who seek revenge, I'm still here. Price has gone up.
I responded immediately, typing out a desperate plea for help, explaining that I was in over my head, that they were coming for me, and I needed him to do more than just dig up dirt this time. I needed him to destroy them. I waited. Minutes passed, then hours. The sun started to dip below the horizon, and I was sitting there staring at the screen, wondering if I'd made a huge mistake. But just when I was about to give up, a notification popped up. 10K, no questions asked. That was it. No greeting, no reassurance, just a cold demand. I hesitated. I didn't have that kind of money, but I knew I had no choice. I replied, telling him I'd get the money somehow, but I needed to know what he could do for me. His response came back almost instantly, like he'd been waiting for my message. I can wipe them off the map, but you'll owe me more than money. The words sent a chill down my spine. What the hell did he mean by that? But I couldn't worry about it. I was too deep in this nightmare already, and I wasn't getting out clean no matter what I did. I agreed. He gave me instructions, cryptic ones. I had to make a cash drop in a specific location, a back alley in a part of town I'd never been to before. Razor wasn't the kind of guy you questioned, so I followed his instructions to the letter. The alley was dark, reeking of piss and rotting garbage, and I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched as I left the money in a dirty trash can, just like he told me to. After that, I went back to the motel, my nerves on edge, waiting for whatever Razor had planned to unfold. And that's when shit started getting even worse. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of someone pounding on the motel door. My heart jumped into my throat. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a rusty lamp, and crept to the door. But when I looked through the peephole, I didn't see Kevin or one of his goons. It was the police. I cracked the door open, confused and panicking. "What's going on?" The officer looked at me with dead eyes. "We need you to come with us."
They didn't give me a choice. I was hauled down to the station, my mind racing with every possible scenario. Had they found out about Razor? Had my ex set me up for something? I had no clue what was happening, but when I got there, they sat me down in a small, dingy interrogation room and started asking questions. "Where were you on the night of October 14th? "What? Here in the motel," I stammered. "Why? What's this about?" The officer didn't flinch. "A man was found dead, brutally murdered." My heart sank. "I don't know anything about that." "Your ex-wife's name came up in connection to the case." At that moment, I felt like I was going to throw up. Had Razor already made his move? Was this what he meant by wiping them off the map? I kept my mouth shut, trying not to let on that I knew anything. But the officer kept pressing, showing me pictures of the crime scene. Blood everywhere. The guy's body was mangled beyond recognition. It was the same type of brutality I'd seen in the videos. "Do you recognize him?" the cop asked, sliding one last photo across the table. I looked down at it and felt my stomach twist into a knot. The guy in the photo, it was the man from the video, the one Kevin and my ex had tortured. But this wasn't just some coincidence. This was a message. They knew I'd seen the videos. They were sending me a fucking warning. I don't know him, I lied, my voice shaky. I've never seen him before. The cop didn't seem convinced, but eventually they let me go, telling me not to leave town. I stumbled out of the station, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of everything. That night I got another message from Razor. It's done. They're next. The cryptic message made my blood run cold. What had I done? I wanted my ex exposed, taken down legally. I wanted the truth to come out, but this was something else. This was Razor's way. And Razor didn't fuck around. I didn't respond to the message. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like I'd unleashed something I couldn't control. And I wasn't wrong. The next morning I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I had to. When I picked up, the voice on the other end was one I'd never forget. Did you think you could just run? It was my ex. Her voice was low, menacing, like I'd never heard it before. I know what you've been doing, she hissed. You think you're smart? You think you can outplay us? My blood turned to ice. I don't know what you're talking about. You're a dead man, she spat. You should have stayed quiet. Now we're coming for you. The call ended before I could say anything else, but the message was clear. I was screwed. Razor may have done his part, but it didn't matter. They weren't going down without a fight. And now, they knew I was behind everything. I didn't know how much longer I had. Days, hours. But one thing was certain. They weren't going to let me walk away from this. I hung up the phone, my heart racing, and sat down on the edge of the bed. I was in too deep, and there was no way out. My only chance now was to finish this, to end it before they ended me. But I wasn't sure I had the strength to do what needed to be done. After that phone call, everything changed. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was pure, paralyzing dread. I could barely think straight. My ex and Kevin weren't just playing games now, they were actively hunting me, and I knew it. I had to get out of that motel, but where the hell was I supposed to go? I didn't have any safe place left. They knew everything about me. They could track me down wherever I went, but I couldn't just sit there and wait for them to come. I packed my things and left the motel as quickly as possible. The moment I stepped out, I felt like a target was on my back. Every car that passed by felt like it was following me. Every stranger's glance felt like a warning. I didn't know who to trust anymore. My phone kept buzzing with blocked numbers, but I couldn't bring myself to answer them. It was probably my ex again, or worse, one of their goons.
I had no plan, no idea what to do next. I was driving aimlessly, my thoughts spiraling, when I realized I hadn't checked my email in a couple of days. Maybe Razor had sent more instructions. I pulled over to the side of a desolate road, my hands shaking as I opened my inbox. There was one new message from Razor. They're moving faster than expected. Don't go home, they'll find you. Meet me. Coordinates attached. Come alone. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Razor wanted to meet in person. That wasn't part of the deal. The guy was a shadow, a ghost. We'd never even spoken directly. The thought of meeting him made my skin crawl, but I didn't have a choice. This was bigger than me now, and if anyone knew how to stop this nightmare, it was him. I plugged the coordinates into my GPS. It was somewhere way out in the middle of nowhere, deep in the woods, the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. I should have been scared, but honestly, I was way past fear. If Razor wanted to kill me, at least it would be quick. It'd be better than whatever my ex and Kevin had planned. The drive was long and quiet. Too quiet. I was constantly checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that black van trailing me again. But there was nothing. Just the open road and the trees closing in around me as I drove deeper into the woods. I finally arrived at the location just after sunset. It was a rundown cabin, barely standing, with no lights, no sign of anyone. Razor had said to come alone, and I did. But I wasn't stupid. I had a knife hidden in my coat pocket, just in case. I didn't trust him. I didn't trust anyone. The door to the cabin was slightly ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. Inside, it was pitch black. The smell of mold and rot hit me immediately, like the place hadn't been touched in years. My pulse was racing. Every instinct was screaming at me to get the hell out of there, but I couldn't. Not yet. "Razor!" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence. The kind of silence that suffocates you. I took a step forward, then another, my feet crunching on the old wooden floorboards. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on me, like the air itself was trying to choke me.
Then I heard it, a faint shuffle behind me. I spun around, knife in hand, but there was nothing, just shadows. My breath was coming out in short, ragged gasps now. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have come here. I was about to turn around and bolt when a voice came from the corner of the room. "You're late." I froze. The voice was cold, detached, like it belonged to someone who had seen too much, done too much. I couldn't see him, but I knew it was Razor. My throat was dry. "I didn't know." "Shut up." He cut me off. "You're in deep shit. They're coming for you. You don't have much time." I couldn't see him, but I felt his presence moving closer. My grip tightened on the knife. I didn't trust him, but I needed him. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "We?" Razor laughed, a low, humorless sound. "You need to disappear. There's no we here. I did my job. Now it's time for you to pay." I swallowed hard. "I don't have the rest of the money yet." I don't want your money," he interrupted, his voice even colder. "Money doesn't matter anymore. You fucked up by getting me involved with these people." "What do you mean?" I was starting to panic now. "You don't get it, do you?" He stepped out of the shadows, and for the first time, I saw him. He was younger than I expected, but there was something in his eyes, something dead. They're not just a couple of psychos. They're part of something bigger. "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked, feeling my stomach drop. "You think your ex and her little boyfriend are the only ones involved?" "No, this is a network. They've been doing this for years, and you just stumbled into it. Now you're a loose end, and they're cleaning up." I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. A network? What the hell does that even mean? Razor didn't answer. He just stared at me, his expression blank. "You've got two choices. Run, and they'll find you. Or fight, and you'll probably die anyway." I felt my blood run cold. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was bigger, darker. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I want you to disappear," he said flatly. "I can help you, but it's going to cost more than money. It's going to cost everything." Before I could respond, I heard something outside. A car engine, the sound of tires on gravel. My heart stopped. They'd found me.
Razor's expression didn't change. He just backed away into the shadows, disappearing like smoke. "They're here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Good luck." And just like that, he was gone. I was alone in the cabin, the knife still trembling in my hand. The sound of footsteps outside grew louder, closer. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. They wanted me to hear them. My pulse was pounding in my ears as I backed up against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. I could hear them whispering to each other, just outside the door. I held my breath as the door creaked open, the cold night air flooding into the cabin. The shadows shifted, and I saw them, two figures standing in the doorway. It was Kevin and my ex. She stepped inside first, her face calm, almost bored. Kevin followed behind, his eyes locked on me like a predator sizing up its prey. "You should have stayed out of this," my ex said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "We could have let you go." I didn't say anything. My whole body was shaking. I knew this was it. I wasn't getting out of this cabin alive. Kevin stepped forward, pulling something out of his coat. A knife, longer than mine, sharper. His eyes gleamed in the darkness. "You're not running this time," he said. My back was pressed against the wall, nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. The only thing I had left was the knife in my hand, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. They were going to kill me, just like they'd killed the others. But before Kevin could take another step, there was a loud crash, the sound of glass shattering. I didn't have time to process what was happening before everything plunged into chaos. The crash of shattering glass echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. My heart leaped into my throat, and for a split second, Kevin froze, his knife still glinting in his hand. My ex whipped her head toward the sound, her eyes narrowing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I didn't wait. It was now or never. I lunged at Kevin, the knife in my hand slicing through the air, but he was quicker. He sidestepped, and my blade missed his chest by inches. He grabbed my wrist, twisting it hard until I thought it was going to snap. Pain shot through my arm, but I didn't let go. I couldn't. If I dropped that knife, I knew I was dead. "You're not getting out of here," Kevin growled, his voice dripping with arrogance. He tightened his grip, his face inches from mine. I could smell his breath, rancid and bitter. I tried to knee him in the gut, but he was too strong. He pushed me back against the wall, slamming me into the wood with so much force that the air shot out of my lungs. My vision blurred. I could see my ex standing just a few feet away, watching, her arms crossed like this was some kind of sick game. "Make it quick, Kevin," she said, her voice calm, almost bored. "We don't have all night." My hand was going numb from the way Kevin was crushing it, but I still had the knife. I just needed one chance, one opening. And then, out of nowhere, there was another loud crash, this time from behind them. The door to the cabin burst open, and 3 figures rushed in. I couldn't see their faces clearly in the dim light, but they moved fast, with precision. Kevin's grip loosened for just a second as he turned to look at the intruders. It was all I needed. I twisted my wrist free and drove the knife into his side. The scream that ripped out of Kevin's throat was like an animal's, raw and primal. His hands flew to the wound, blood already seeping through his fingers. He staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief. "You—" he gasped, his voice barely a whisper, but he couldn't finish the sentence. He collapsed to the ground, his body twitching, blood pooling around him. I barely had time to catch my breath before I looked up and saw my ex standing there staring at me. But she wasn't scared. She wasn't panicking. She just looked disappointed. "You should have stayed dead," she said, her voice cold and hollow. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a gun. My heart stopped. I didn't even have time to react. The world slowed down as I saw her raise the gun, her finger tightening on the trigger. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation. She wanted this. She wanted to end me. But before she could pull the trigger, one of the figures from the doorway moved. Fast, too fast for her to react. He tackled her to the ground, the gun flying out of her hand and skidding across the floor. She screamed, a high-pitched sound filled with fury, not fear. They wrestled for control, but the figure had her pinned. I recognized him now. It was Razor. He didn't say a word as he pinned her to the ground, his face expressionless, almost mechanical. She kicked and thrashed, trying to break free, but Razor was unflinching, cold, calculated. "You ruined everything," she spat, her voice venomous. "You think this is going to stop it? You have no idea what's coming." Razor didn't respond. He just tightened his grip around her throat, his expression never changing. I watched, frozen in place as she gasped for air, her face turning red, then purple. Her eyes bulged, and her legs kicked out violently, but it didn't matter. Razor was relentless, and then it was over. She went limp, her body collapsing into the floor like a broken doll. Razor didn't let go immediately. He held on for a few more seconds, just to be sure. Then he stood up, wiping his hands on his pants like nothing had happened. I was still sitting on the floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't believe it was over. Kevin was dead. My ex was dead. The nightmare was finally over, but there was no relief, only emptiness. Razor turned to me,
his eyes cold and hollow. "It's done," he said flatly. "You're safe now." Safe? The word felt meaningless. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel anything. I just stared at him, trying to process what had just happened. I don't understand," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why? Why did you help me?" Razor didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, his face unreadable. "Because it had to be done," he finally said. "You were never going to stop them on your own." He turned to leave, but I couldn't let him go without answers. "What now?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What happens now?" Razor paused at the doorway, not turning back. "Disappear," he said, his voice flat. "You're part of this now, whether you like it or not." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but before I could say anything, he was gone, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost. The other two figures who had come with him followed silently, leaving me alone in the cabin with two dead bodies and a head full of questions. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the blood on the floor, my mind numb. Razor had said I was part of this now. Part of what? The network he'd mentioned? The one my ex and Kevin had been a part of? The thought made my skin crawl, but I didn't have the energy to process it. Not then. Eventually, I forced myself to get up, my legs weak, my body trembling. I couldn't stay there. I had to leave. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to my old life. Not after everything that had happened. Not after everything I'd seen. I grabbed the keys to my car and walked out of the cabin, leaving the blood and death behind me. The night was cold, the wind biting at my skin, but I didn't feel it. I felt nothing. I got into the car and drove, not looking back. The road stretched out in front of me, endless and empty, just like the rest of my life. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. All I knew was that this nightmare wasn't over. Not really. I was still in it. I always would be. Because you don't just walk away from the kind of darkness I'd been pulled into. You become it.